and to record. Here we go. Ta-da. Wow, looks like everything worked. That's fun. So welcome. This is Made in LA Writers. We're going to be talking about monstrous transformations today. And I think what I'd like to do is start with an introduction for our writers. So if we could start with Andrea, just give a quick update on you, what you're writing about, and we'll go from there.
Okay, thanks, Cody. And hi, everybody who's here. I love Made in LA, and I love LA. And right now I'm writing short stories, but I have a long-term novel that I'm working on. I'm into a big, heavy second draft, just did a rewrite session and went on a writing retreat, very socially isolated with writing friends. And it's fiction, and then I'm doing some creative nonfiction shorts.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to just go clockwise in what I see on my Zoom screen. So Noriko, if you could go next.
Thanks, Cody. Hi, I'm Noriko Nakada, and I'm a writer and teacher here in Los Angeles. Love LA. Basking in a Rams victory yesterday and a Dodger championship that I'll still be talking about the rest of my life. And I'm writing right now. I'm actually working on a poetry collection of notes or letters to my father. He is in quarantine up in Oregon, 1,000 miles away. And so I've been working on those poems, an epistolary, I suppose, and also edits on a YA historical novel.
Great, thank you. And well, best wishes to your father.
Thank you. Yeah, he turns 90 on Thursday. His 90th birthday is Thursday.
Let's hear from Rosalind next, please.
Hi, I'm Rosalind, and I also love Made in LA. Wonderful stories. I've received great feedback from my friends who have the book, and they just love all the stories. I have just completed my first draft of a novel, and I've started rewriting it. It's crime fiction, and that's about it.
Great, thank you. And Sara, you're next in my clockwise box order. But I should also say that Sara was instrumental in putting today together, in putting our December event together, and in putting together the event we'll be having on February 10th. So thank you, Sara, for powering us forward.
Thank you for allowing me to be a part of Made in LA. It's been a dream come true for me. Made in LA, it's like an amazing anthology. I have been very, very grateful that I've been able to contribute to not only this volume, but the previous volume as well. They're beautiful stories about Los Angeles and very eclectic and memorable stories, character driven, and just being a part of it is awesome. So this is the second time that I've contributed to the Made in LA anthology, and just I've mainly focused on short stories, urban fantasy, dark urban fantasy, and just really appreciating, being a part of the process. So thank you, Cody, for having me be a part of it.
I'm thinking back to your story from the previous volume. And for those of you who haven't read it yet, I'd recommend you check it out. I'll just give you a 2-word preview: cockroaches and mariachis. Yeah, so thank you, Sara. AS, you also have stories in volume 2 and volume 3, right?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Werewolves and strange happenings. To not give anything away in the volume 3 story. My name's AS Youngless. I mainly write short stories at the moment. They seem to work for me in this climate that we're living in. I'm also digging out an old novel that I worked on and starting to overhaul it in the second draft. I mainly write speculative, science fiction, weird, I like writing weird and strange stories. Maybe not as dark as Sarah's, but I prefer the I'm gonna say weird. I'm just gonna keep saying weird. So
We should do some awards for who has the darkest, strangest, weirdest story, because, and I mean, I'd love to hear what people think about that. But since we're talking about monstrous transformations today, maybe we'll get to that. I guess I should round this out. I'm Cody Sisco. I write speculative fiction. I'm working on the third novel in my Resonant Earth series, which is an alternate history saga that imagines, well, for one, it imagines that maybe we'd be in a better place as Americans right now if minorities and women, for example, had civil rights 100 years ago. So that's what I've been working on, moving towards finishing up that novel and thinking about maybe someday doing volume 4 of the Maiden LA anthology series. But we don't have any announcements there yet. Stay tuned. If we open for submissions, we will let everyone know how to get in touch with us with your stories. So today, well, I mentioned we're talking about monstrous transformations, and this came about because we're creating this event in partnership with Book Monster Santa Monica, a bookstore which some of you may be familiar with. And well, it turns out that we're sad that they couldn't join us today. They've had to close their store for 2 weeks due to a coronavirus exposure. So what we will be doing is sending you to their website today and following up in the coming weeks to encourage people to shop from them and to support bookstores in your area. It's a really difficult time for businesses right now. I know Skylight Books also had to close for a few days over a coronavirus exposure as well. So it's out there. We're in the middle of it. We're staying home and staying safe and finding ways to get together. But yeah, it's and then on top of everything else this last week. So if you're here, I applaud you wherever you are in the space-time continuum. If you're watching this later, be assured it was as weird and as scary as you think it might have been. But thank you for being here today. We are going to hear from our contributors to this volume, and we're going to have a good discussion. So I think to kick it off, I'll ask Andrea to share from her story, Empty Glass. And I may have a question or two for you, and some of our contributors may also have some questions for you about your story.
Okay, thank you so much. So the story starts at an acquaintance party in the back of one of those nice homes up in Silver Lake. Izzy was left alone at the Mosaic Cafe table. Alone is what she could not be, staring at the tiny glass squares that pimpled the table. Some were chipped and others fully cracked, enough to make her eyes sting. How tragic the splintered lines looked. She took more gin swallows than slammed the empty glass onto the table hard enough to hear it splinter. Jesus, that's my good set, said bitch host Lana. Cheap set, managed Izzy. Pressure pinched her sinuses and her eyes teared up. She hadn't intended to crack a glass. Words and tears mixed between cries. The party circled around her. Their eyes spoke. Why do you do this every time we party? This made her go deeper, cry from the gut, all animal howling. Bitch host Lana's posture saying, you're a mess. If Izzy could ride on a condor, rise above her own heaving back, she would fly toward the sea and fall into it. A shard that had chipped away from her broken glass reflected a candle flame. Izzy smoothed her hand over the glass, scooped the triangle into her palm, and gently formed a fist to shield it from the world. Then she leaves and she goes on a grocery run to bring back more gin to the party. A woman stood under the melon streetlight. Is this your SUV? The woman asked. Hi, yes, Izzy smiled. Her smile was steady, but her stomach lurched. I'm taking your dog. A fist beat inside Izzy's chest. The woman's words didn't compute. She began to rake at her purse handle. I have backup. Give me the dog or I'm calling them. Her cell phone shone gold under the street lamp. Izzy said, I'm leaving, and stepped forward, but met the woman's shoulders just inches from her face. You're staying right here until you give me that dog. The woman seethed. You left it locked in the car. No air to breathe. Are you insane or just stupid? Leaving it alone in the heat? Look how terrified it is. Good thing you don't have a kid. You'd let that child fry. Panic brimmed in Izzy's throat. Florrie's barks were sharp, stabbing accusations. Yes, Izzy had indeed left the dog locked up, but there were reasons. Give me the dog. The woman's words threatened through gritted teeth. Gin and bile shot up into Izzy's mouth. There wasn't an exit or a back alley out of this. Stop yelling at me, Izzy managed. She looked back at the house, heard the laughter buffeting at the patio. Her fingers pulsed as she pressed the piece of glass into her palm. Izzy couldn't protect herself. She wasn't protecting her dog. Why would anyone protect Izzy? Nobody would come for her. Izzy swallowed over the rock in her throat, took the woman's rants, and completely buckled. Take her, she whispered. Then she hands off the dog, and now she's in her car. It's for the best, she said. Her voice cracking through dry lips, the dog was better off. She sped down the hill and turned on the radio. Baffled by her decision, she was struck dumb that she could hand off Florrie to an unknown, and more horrified by the relief she felt. She reached for the shard, resting inches away. Izzy checked the mirrors and changed over to the slow lane. The 5 arched upward into the purpling sky above an interstate crossing underneath it. She pulled over to the guardrail and wept in convulsive bursts. How was life so impossible? What was wrong with her? She pounded the steering wheel and asked the roof why. Izzy's mind quieted. Her words retreated into a thought symphony. She could direct the finale of her own desperate story, sail off on the hot breeze and cascade in spirals until the pavement bedded her, commingling skin and earth. Her body stamped into the ground, the city welcoming her as beloved family. There was life still tingling in her fingers, unhooking from the steering wheel. Cells that pushed blood rivers inside her that raced to stay alive. Hands now massaging exhausted face muscles. She cupped them over her eyes and stared into the dark. A calm shrouded her. She palmed the piece of glass again, released the car door, and stood against the warm fender. Cars blasted past. Down in the cauldron beneath the overpass, headlights shimmered. So many people. Life teeming in opposite directions. Izzy stretched her neck and tallied the height from the 5 to the farthest street below. Gas fumes and gin flurrying through her head. What was a life? The distance between the top of the heap and the bottom of the pile. She could cease the pain pumping through her with one decision. Thank you.
Thank you. I remember reading that the first time, and it's a little bit, it takes your breath away at the end. But in the beginning, we see Izzy at this party, and the kind of first indication that she's someone who's going through a lot or maybe is going to make some bad decisions is when she's trying to sort of break up this couple who have come together, and she's sort of vibing on them really hard. And then when she breaks the glass of gin, her instinct is, oh, we need more gin. Not like, hey, let's stop. Of all the things, yeah, probably more gin is not the answer. So we kind of see her heading in that direction. I want to ask, what questions do you all have about Izzy and her trajectory? I mean, there's so much complicated psychology baked into the story, which I love, around caring for the dog, but not caring for the dog. And I'm wondering what you thought about when you were making that, the pivotal part.
Right. Even in a short cutting in the reading, I think that building up to that moment where the dog is no longer in her care, it took some work to get it there, because she likes the dog. She has cared about the dog. The dog relies on her very heavily, but is a very difficult dog, a reactive dog. And then she's from a different region. She's not from LA, and she doesn't really understand the dog culture. And so she's confronted with a lot about just how people handle these kinds of interactions. So that's all a confrontation that she doesn't have the skills. But the dog was some being in her life that would get the attention that she was seeking for herself. And so the dog was in some way, like a conflict of interest, in that she'd bring the dog to the party and everybody loved, and they'd always oogle over the dog every time she'd come to these parties. And so this night she was like, "You're staying in the car in an evening. It's not hot outside, but it's an evening," and she keeps the dog in the car. And that's really the beginning. That's the unfurling of the big problem. Yeah.
I love that. And I see that we've got watching on YouTube a few of our friends, including Andre Hardy, who says hi and bravo. But he's also wondering, what is Izzy's wound?
Right. I love it. And yeah. Oh, Andre. So Izzy is someone who is struggling so badly inside that she's really beginning to crumble. So her identity, from leaving Southern Ohio and coming out and having dreams in LA and having none of that become realized, and not having an infrastructure of her own people, and maybe relying on this dog, her wound is really that her self-care, her, I'm trying to think, her self-worth are just shattering, and that's really in the title of Empty Glass. So she's all spilled out. Yeah, so her wound would come back to basic self-worth, because even coming out to LA, I've said this before, that LA can eat people up and spit them out, as we all know. And I love LA, but the experience can be very different for people coming from the kinds of regions like where I'm from, and it can really swallow people alive. So that's really what's happening there.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your story, and I'm thinking also of the story by AP Thayer, The City, which is a sort of similar take on being eaten alive by what happens here, which is some degree of ambition, disconnection, self-dissolving dissolution.
Right. When I read it, I was like, well, there's a binary there. But when we talk about monstrous transformation, when you read the full story, there's a frenetic beginning. The pace is really somewhat disjointed and wordy, and she's just a talker. And as she crumbles or shatters and gets closer to the decision whether she may end her life, you really don't know. You got to read the story to find out. The language actually becomes more introspective and calmer and more sensory based. And the transformation really is like the monster is within this woman, and she's fighting against that monster. But the closer she gets to it, sort of the calmer and more decisive she becomes.
She reaches her limit.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And we may shift a little bit in terms of thinking about the monsters within and think about the monsters without, as we hear next from Noriko Nakada and her story, Infamy. So I'm going to put Noriko on spotlight here. It's a historical fiction story set in the, well, I'll let you talk about your story.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Andrea. Oh, a couple of lines were just really sitting with me. What is life? I mean, these questions that I feel like I have been really toying with, just being in this current historical context. These big life questions keep ringing through my head, and they were definitely in your characters as well. So yeah, I'm going to read a little bit of Infamy in the part I'm reading today. It takes place the morning after Pearl Harbor in a Japanese enclave over on the west side of Los Angeles. I imagine that as a December morning when the marine layer was really thick and cold, and Natasha and her friend are walking to school, just like they do every morning. The two friends breathe in the uneasy quiet of the morning until the sound of a car passing along Santa Monica Boulevard propels them towards school. People are up and about, heading to work, to school. Maybe yesterday was just a dream, and today life would unfold without incident. The two classmates, a boy and a girl, thrust together by neighborhood proximity and alphabetical order, walk toward Emerson Junior High. Andy walks on the street side as he does every day, but Natasha doesn't notice. A few more cars race down the street, and as they fall into the rhythm of their usual morning walk, the marine layer burns off. Despite the news that crackled through radios all day and night, despite the headlines in the paper this morning, the sun breaks through and the teenagers squint into the bright light. Birds chirp, the occasional car rushes past, and then a faceless voice from a truck yells, "Go home, Jap," as it speeds past. At first, they aren't sure they heard correctly. They look at one another, but then a voice from another car yells, "Sneaky Jap." Natasha's face turns red, and Andy now understands his mother's instructions that morning. Make sure you walk with Natasha to school. It was something he did every day, but his mother must have known something could happen. Andy grabs Natasha's hand as they quicken their pace. He has never held her hand before, but Natasha can barely feel his steady palm. Her heart is a drum, making it hard for her to hear the voices emerging from open car windows. Go back where you came from. They walk faster, are almost running, ears pricked to each passing car, bracing for words spewed from windows. But before they can turn off Santa Monica and escape to a side street, a cup of coffee is hurled at them. It splashes across the brightly lit sidewalk and splatters on Natasha's blue and white dress, leaving dark brown splotches. Andy grabs her roughly by the arm and steers her into the shade of an alley. She brushes her hands down the hot, wet front of her dress. I'm okay, it's okay, she says, but her hands shake as she wipes at the stains. Those, he says, his words biting the cool morning air. You don't have to stay with me, I can make it on my own. She blinks away the tears before he can see them. I'm not leaving you and you're not okay, your hands. She folds her shaking hands at her waist and tries to take a deep breath. He places his hands on her shoulders and she is suddenly so small. My mom said things might be rough for a while, but it's going to be okay. Even as the words escape his mouth, he isn't sure they're true. We're okay. Their eyes lock. We are okay. In the shade of the alley, she buries his face in his chest. She breathes in the smell of him, soap, damp grass, and dust. He holds her, and both of them hope he's right.
Beautiful.
So
Thank
I
you.
think, sure. I think that in the face of this week, we can see how monstrous folks we don't necessarily see every day, but they can reveal themselves in ways and under circumstances that we might not recognize.
Yeah, when we saw each other online just before the events of Wednesday, was it? We were talking about masks and how the monsters among us have been unmasked, I think is the quote you said. And there's that feeling in your story of people becoming their worst and feeling free to do, horrible things to other people, that they've got permission.
Right. Yeah. and that, fear and having an enemy identified, whether that whether it's been identified with honesty or any truth whatsoever, and people painting a world in very broad strokes, the enemy becomes, a teenage girl walking to school.
Yeah. And the counterpoint to that, them holding hands, that's kind of the image and the feeling, the sensation that you describe, that sticks with me now. I don't know if it's because of isolation, but the fact that she had someone who could physically, be there for her and comfort her, and that it means a lot these days.
It sure does. And it's kind of inspired by my dad. My dad was 11 when Pearl Harbor occurred. And when he showed up to school, he remembers the one friend who would still talk to him. And so Andy is that one friend for Natasha who is going to stay true. And, we all try to look for the helpers when the world seems pretty bleak. And so he's that for her. And for us, for the readers, who wish we could do more to help.
I see Elizabeth says hello. She's watching on YouTube. She says the monsters that have yet to show their faces.
Right.
That's been a reckoning, over the past number of years, when if people have become emboldened to express things that others thought were beyond the pale and unconscionable. And now they're worn proudly as if they're badges.
Right. Yeah. And how emboldened people feel to share things that, 4 years ago, people wouldn't be quite so emboldened to share.
Yeah. Well, we push back, we resist.
For sure.
We call bullshit.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you. I also want to say I love the behind you. Those
Thank you.
Paintings.
Yeah, this is an LA artist, Jose Ramirez, who's also a teacher, and he does these great.
They're gorgeous.
Yeah, these great prints, and this is actually an alphabet, so it's a Spanish alphabet.
Oh, cute.
Which is helping my son learn his abecedario.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Noriko.
Thank you. Thanks again for hosting.
I don't remember the clockwise order that we had before, so it may vary a little bit now. I'm looking at now it's a vertical or horizontal strip. So let's go with AS next. And let's see if I can do this. Here we are. Hi. So your story, Unwanted Gifts. Well, let's hear about it and hear from you.
So Unwanted Gifts. Sorry, the last two, there were a lot of emotions in those last two, and very reflective of life. And I look forward to these events to kind of escape from reality, and but it's a good thing hearing your words in this perspective, and seeing how cyclical time is, or just that feeling that so many people get in Los Angeles specifically, Andrea. So this is me gathering myself as I get my story together, and mine diverts from that. Obviously, there's still a monster or monsters in my story. Unwanted Gifts is about a brother and a sister named May and Charlie, and they're walking home one stagnantly hot late summer day, and there's this weird flash in the sky. And when the flash stops, because it's so blinding they can't see, there's this object sitting on May's toe, the toe of her shoe, and they pick it up, and they don't know what it is. It's this weird looking thing that they've never seen before. It makes no sense. And they desperately want to know what it is. So they take it across the street to a group of guys that stand outside and hang out every day. And they bring it to one of the older gentlemen there named Martin, because Martin Martin knows everything. That's what Martin tells everybody. Martin tells anybody who listens how much Martin knows. So as kids, they think, well, he must, because why would you go around telling people you know things if you don't? And this is the moment just after things start going wrong. So after they've picked up this object and they walk across the street, things stop working. Cell phones stop working, a motorcycle stops working, a car, a Buick just rolls to a stop at the stop sign, the engine stops working. And this is right after that. The wind kicked up, bringing a chill I didn't expect in midsummer. I pulled my hoodie closed and eyed Charlie, who was still standing next to Martin. Neither of them noticed the lack of lights. Martin was too busy telling Charlie vivid lies about what the thing could be. I picked up on words like an old plug and when I was your age, which were both tells translating to, I don't know, but so many people are listening, I'm gonna pretend I do. Little C, we have to go, I said, turning nearly all sets of eyes on me. Dad's home soon. Not now, May, Charlie bit through his clenched jaw. Martin's explaining the thing he found. More eyes found me. Martin's were two of them. Where'd you find it, May? Martin asked. Why is nothing working? One of the guys said. Maybe that piece of junk is turning everything off, Mr. P said. He scowled at me, petting the fuel tank of his motorcycle like a dog. Ever think of that? He tapped his temple before pointing in my direction. What did you do, little girl? I turned to Charlie, who joined their side in a fight I hadn't known we were having. He has it, not me, I said, squaring off my hips and pushing my jaw out. I just found it. Hand still on the bike, Mr. P leaned in, forcing me back a step. Where? Over there, right after the sky flash, Charlie offered. I imagined ways I would torture him when we got home. The sky what? Martin said. I saw it, Mr. Preston replied, followed by the murmuring of others agreeing they'd seen it too. Right before I got here, Martin, you were probably too busy getting stoned to notice. He spoke to Martin, but kept his attention on me. And what, you found that thing and decided to bring it here? One of the regular guys stumbled into our path. You're not leaving. I missed the whole page, so hold on one moment. I turned too far, excuse me. So where was I? And what, you found that thing and decided to bring it here? I didn't bring it here, I hissed. He did. You crossed the street before me, May, Charlie said, shifting the blame back to me. Mr. P turned to Charlie, which gave me a second to look around and see if anything else had changed. The lights at the end of the street that had been on a moment earlier were now out. The loud sounds of sirens, car alarms, horns, and traffic hushed. I spun on my heels, looking up and down the block, and found every building I could see in the twilight was downright dark. Bodies filed into the streets as the few remaining sounds faded into stillness. Our numbers of 13 to 20 people multiplied into triple digits. The only sounds left were neighbors chattering and crows cawing in the navy sky. Maybe the thing isn't the problem, I suggested. Maybe it's something else. Mr. P snorted a disbelieving laugh. Maybe you're just trying to change the subject because it's all on you and Charlie, he said. That's a good point, one guy said. Everything was fine before you came over here, another added. Whispers washed over me in waves as they grumbled. I pushed to Charlie's side and snatched the thing from Martin's hand. We got a jet, I said for only Charlie to hear. Mom and Dad will be worried. I hoped that our place still had power. I pushed Charlie to the front in front of me like a battering ram against the crowd, getting us out of the street and onto the sidewalk. I'll go see if any cops are up the block, the owner of the Buick said, to no one in particular. By now, his car was one of four sitting dead in the middle of the road, doors hanging open because what was the point of closing them? What they gonna do? Mr. Peace asked. It was a good question. Nothing, that's what they'll do. And if things start working while they're here, his voice trailed off, they'll say we made the whole thing up because that's what happens on this side of town. But I knew Mr. P was wrong about the lights. Nothing was coming back on. If anything, the blanket was spreading, like the marine layer does in early May, absorbing sounds and sealing us in. Well, I'm going anyway, the man said to Mr. P and started up the block. I watched him leave and then lifted my eyes to the sky and saw nothing but stars. 1 billion prickly dots, like the thing somehow revealed a velvetly black sky I'd only ever seen in pictures. On a normal night, it would have been filtered by streetlights and smog, never getting so pitch black to allow points of celestial light to make up for all the earthy ones no longer working. I could see for miles, and then it hit me. No planes. I hadn't meant to say it out loud and was instantly sorry I did. A stir of cusses wove around the street, moving like a boomerang until they landed next to me and Charlie. It's your fault. It was good old know-it-all Martin. You brought that thing over here to cause trouble. Charlie's shoulders sank, and I kicked into a big sister mode. He came here for your help, old man. The biggest mistake was thinking that you knew anything in the first place. Charlie wasn't keen on having me stand up for him, but I didn't care. Not then, because I knew things were about to go south and fast.
Thank you. And they do go south fast amid the suspicion and the fear of how things have changed. I mean, it hits differently now than it did a year ago when we were, putting together the anthology. I mean, it's beautiful. Noriko chimed in on the chat that she loves that description of the sky with the stars. And it strikes me that finding the beautiful thing in the midst of the terrifying changed thing is where we're at these days. So yeah. You predicted the future too.
Well,
or you found a universal.
That scene, the sky, I think it was 2003. I was still living in Ohio, and there was a huge power outage that took out the power grid in New York, Ohio, and I remember my sister and my mom were in New York City, and they said you could see the stars. And I remember, I mean, like Cleveland doesn't have as much pollution, light pollution as here, but there's still light pollution. You're not going to see the Milky Way if you're standing in downtown Cleveland. And I remember standing in the courtyard of my apartment building and being like, what is that? I don't know that I had ever seen a sky that looks like that in all of my life. And you could see the Milky Way. You could see like vibrant colors and just having that here, because if you grew up here, you're 12, 13 years old, chances are you've never seen that. And I've tried to chase the sky with my son. And there's still like pollution in Joshua Tree, and there's still pollution in Palm Springs and Big Bear. And but yeah, it's just having that little moment of this is scary, this is weird, that's real. That beautiful world is real. Yeah.
One of the other things I appreciated is the fact that the neighborhood is like, it's working as it does in the beginning of the story, and then it just breaks down, and by the end of it, it's mobs, running through the streets, and I don't know, it's just like it feels totally believable.
Yeah. And for me, Martin is like the big, I mean, there's a lot of villains, there's a lot of people calling names, and a lot of people saying stuff, but him not going, hey, wait a minute, these are kids. These are kids. Right. They don't know what this is. Let's sit down and think about this, instead of going, no, this is your fault. Yeah. And then changing that tide, because that's all it takes. I mean, we've seen that. Right. It takes one person, you just get caught up in the mess, and then no one wants to admit they're scared. And then here we are, Yeah.
So Sarah and Noriko are chiming in on the chat too. I see, but Sarah, I'm going to read it for you unless you want to read it out. Same with Noriko. Sarah says, the mob in the story becomes a collective monster through misunderstanding. Yeah. And Noriko, who is to blame? They're seeking to blame someone for this, but if they can't find who's to blame, what happens?
Exactly. Everybody wants to have that that thing to grab onto. This is why this is wrong. If we remove that, then everything is better. And
And we should mistrust that. I mean, we should,
Yes.
when that happens, we should say, like, I get it. You're looking for reasons and solutions, but it's the source of so much evil to jump to conclusions that way.
It is. And that's everything. I mean, at this point of the story, things aren't fantastic, but they're still at a safe place. They're at a place they could stop and go, okay. And then after that moment, the page that I accidentally turned to is when everything, it just unravels. It unravels, and they want to find someone to blame. The two kids are there. It must be that thing. What is it? We need to stop this. And then it just, yeah.
And eventually, I mean, I don't want to spoil it, but May becomes a monster in some respects as well.
She does. And, you know, so it's just a lot of responsibility to put on a child. And I feel that there was so much responsibility on her because, I mean, when they get, you know, this is partially a spoiler, but when they get home, there's no one there.
Right.
So it's her and her brother.
Yeah, and she's taking care of him.
And she's really, right? In my head, he was 12 and she was 14. So, I mean, 14 is still just not that, you're not grown up. I don't think 20 is that grown up. I mean, 14 is you're still in school. You're maybe in high school, like early freshman, sophomore. I mean, you haven't been living in the world, even if you have been out and your life isn't, you know, Saved by the Bell, rich parents, everything goes like a sitcom, you know. It's still different when you're actually an adult and it's all on you.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And so for her, I just always felt when she made that choice, it was just her showing that she needed somebody else to be there for her. She needed somebody to step up, and she needs somebody to be the adult and be the parent.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go, Sarah, let's hear from you. And I'm not sure which of your stories we'll be talking about because you have two in this anthology. Both are creepy, dark urban fantasy, which I love.
I'm reading from We Found Love as the Undead, because I guess it's just calling to me because it's about wayward love, like not only of you know, a romantic kind of love, but also a sisterly love when, you know, feuding sisters fight over one guy who really can't choose between which sister he really, you know, loves, or even if he loves any of them at all, right? If you have to make that choice. That's not a good position to be in, but it's basically about love in different types of forms, which is something I think hits me nowadays, you know, as we're in quarantine. Just, you know, you get to spend more time with your loved ones. They get to kind of get on your nerves a little bit more. And in this story, they definitely get on each other's nerves. So it speaks to me now. So basically, this is about a budding graffiti artist who can bring the dead back to life as zombies. So I'm going to read from the beginning. While everyone except the occasional drug dealer, late night party goer, or general misfit stayed indoors, Satoshi still lurked in the streets. The gangly, budding graffiti artist squatted in front of a 3-stoned rock garden, shaped as harmoniously as the bulb of a spring onion, giving the impression of open space. He pulled his hoodie up over his head. The regal gold-trimmed berry-colored spray can that usually managed to sit in his left back pocket rolled noisily onto the tri-colored brick ground. Another sudden gust of wind stirred the red and white paper lanterns overhead. Their dim firefly glow illuminated the surroundings of the Japanese Village Plaza, downtown Los Angeles. At first, Satoshi didn't look at her. Instead, he gazed at the blackened windows of the trendy storefronts and bakery. The windows' reflections caught the glimmer of her hauntingly white complexion. His heart sprouted flapping wings as it beat against his ribcage. He picked up his spray can, but dropped it again as sparks flew from its valve. Satoshi ran a finger gently down the side of it. It's time, he thought. He found the strength to look at her. The girl lay motionless in front of the stone garden. Her limbs spiraled out of her bent torso like soggy ramen noodles. Her opened eyes gave Satoshi the impression of being lost in the Bermuda Triangle. If you stared at her dilated pupils long enough, you might get lost in their abyss. Satoshi sighed. Satoshi treasured the girl, Akiko, who had always smelled of peonies and fresh midnight sage. He was one of 3 sisters. Everyone had loved the moon-faced beauties interchangeably. He had learned to love them as if they were one entity. They had been one of the many loves and burdens of Satoshi's life. After slipping on his black dust mask that had a toothy grin with blood-dripping fangs printed on it, he touched her cold, rubbery skin with warm fingertips, and she glowed even brighter. He picked up his spray can and aimed it above her body, and then pressed the valve button and began to maneuver his hand and arm with purpose. The can emitted silvery beads of spray that mirrored the essence of Akiko's moonbeam skin. Satoshi grinned as the girl's spray-painted portrait hovered above her body. Wisps of paint trailed down to feather her skin and clothing. The overpowering industrial smell of the can's contents caught in the back of Satoshi's throat. He coughed in spite of wearing a mask as he peered down at her lovingly. The outlines of her round face and full lips were being kissed by the light of the paper lanterns. Her hair appeared like an ink spill, overlapping shadows and hanging slightly in her hooded eyes. The picture moved, smiling and winking at Satoshi, as he filled in the curves of her full-figured body. He felt sticky. A layer of fresh sweat formed over him. He stopped spraying and shook the can when the delicate translucent beads of spray splattered unevenly over his curled up fingers. Sparks flew from the can, signaling him to end his painting. His masterpiece began to frown. Akiko's lovely, smooth face rippled as if a stone were skimmed on the surface of a pond or lake. She became rough where she'd been smooth, colorful where she'd been pure light. The twirling go of the lanterns caught it all. Akiko's lopsided face resembled a colorful lollipop that had been abandoned on the sidewalk to the mercy of the sun. Her limbs bent outward, as if her body could never regain its own balance. Her black hair shivered into a shocking violet color. There was something primal in her permanent snare. Satoshi felt his spine twitch as he drew back his body. The creation sat up and glared at Satoshi. I get more unfuckable every time you bring me back. This is ruining my love life. Satoshi blushed as his eyes surveyed the curves of her once supple, living body. Regardless of Satoshi searched for the words that would make the arrangement of interchangeable related lovers not sound taboo. Past. He cleared his throat. Unsought sentiments, words between them that remained unspoken had dried up in the back of his throat. Akiko's arms bent at an unsightly angle as she dug in her purse and pulled out her phone. Her fingers were nimble yet stiff as they tapped upon the screen. She held up the phone, threw up a peace sign. The flash was almost blinding to the undead eye. Satoshi threw up his arms in a meager protest. Not this weird stuff again. Being the undead in the heart of downtown LA is not a social media experience. Why not? Akiko said as she threw her phone into her purse. YOLO. What the hell does that even mean? Satoshi slipped his spray can into his left back pocket as he stood up. It means you only live once. Akiko tapped the outside flap of her tan leather purse. Unless you're a Tanaka sister, then some prick named Satoshi keeps reanimating your corpse.
Thank you. Yes, lots of claps. I love how when we hear from Makiko, right? Like she's this, well, first of all, she's this like really vividly illustrated dead body that Satoshi's painting. And you know, we're waiting to see what happens. And then when she revives, she's not what you expect. Right? She's got a mouth. She's, you know, the first thing she does is reach for her phone so she can like capture this moment where obviously like she looks like a melted lollipop and her ramen noodle legs are all over. And she's like, I need to get this on my phone so I can share it with all my followers. Like she's just a big personality, I guess. And I wonder, you know, we see more of her than her sisters, but she's got two sisters. I wonder also, you know, what they're like. So maybe we'll need to read some more about those other sisters at some point. And Satoshi's gift is a burden also.
It is a burden. And he feels very committed to reanimating them, bringing them back over some sort of sentiment that he has for them, some promise, you know, that he made to the family. But in reality, it's just really his selfishness because he wants them all, right? He can't choose. So he's like, I'm doing this for you. You're not. I mean, you're doing it for yourself. You know,
I love the layers.
Yes.
The layers built into the story. I love that. What else should we know about the transformations here? I mean, we've got dead and undead. We've got beauty and ugliness kind of wrapped up together, and family.
I think it's the transformation of the heart, because through this story, he does actually end up picking one of them. And it's the one that he's always kind of had in his heart. And it's Akiko. You know, he's always had something for her specifically, but that's the one that he finally chooses, and the one worth, you know, they're all worth reviving in a way, right? But she's the one worth dying for.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed that. Let's hear from Rosalind next.
Okay.
Let me put you on spotlight. Here we go. And
Thank you.
Rosalind's story is Tell Me Your Name.
Well, I was so interested in this theme of transformation and monsters. And while the people were reading, the other authors, I tried to identify the monsters in their pieces, and they're so different. So thank you, Sarah, for identifying the monster in yours. I had to think about it. So I wanted to identify the monster in my story, which is so different from the other monsters. The premise of my story is a young, poor teenage boy comes to the door of a rich teenage girl begging for money. She's very compassionate and generous. She goes and gets him money, gives it to him, shuts the door, and that's that. That's the story she tells her parents. And then she turns to the reader and says, well, they got the abbreviated version. And she gives another version, which has a lot more detail. And it's the same story, except more happens. But the generosity of the girl shines through. And the next version is given to a detective who comes to their door. And it's a completely different version of what happens. And I am going to read the last part, which gives something away, but it encapsulates this theme of monsters and transformation. Rewind. The absolutely last time, cross my heart and hope to die. So there he was on our doorstep, smiling. Will you walk into my parlor, said the spider to the fly. Oh, no, no, said the little fly. But he came in anyway and stuffed his face like it was the Last Supper. All the while, Pammy kept the malevolent one tucked away and out of sight, pretty much under control. Good luck with that. He was mine. Pathetic little Pammy of the frizzy hair and chipmunk cheeks, leading him into the bedroom and showing him her ticky toys, sweet 16 and never been kissed. I opened my mouth and sucked him in and felt his delicious man thing. But then Pammy smacked me away and said, no, never again. We don't do that anymore. Party pooper. It was a perfect starry night, total Van Gogh. Time for our romp in the garden. Pammy trying to pull us back because she knows the night belongs to me. Down the hill we fly, over the stones, faster, faster, with his hand tightly in my grip. I'm like this witch on a broomstick. Aye, aye, free, scree, until he goes apeshit and bursts the bubble. Why do they always do that? Oh, let go. Why are you acting so weird? He won't play. Pulling away, snapping his arm up and down, kicking, twisting to throw me off, going all National Geographic like a deer in the jaws of a hyena. And everyone's like, play nicely, Pamela. But no one to stop Pamela this time. No teachers on the playground. And Pammy, sweet Pammy, shriveling away in the shadows. The red dot in my brain explodes and I shake him loose. As he stumbles, I smash the base of the telescope into his head, and down and away he goes, crashing onto the rocks. Such a shame he wouldn't play. We really liked him. Back in the condo, Pammy is sleeping, and I snuggle back into her, safe in her nighttime dreams. She won't remember a thing. So this monster is called a dissociative personality disorder, which is a split personality. And it's a surprise until the end because she's a lovely, compassionate person throughout the story. And then suddenly the monster appears. And so I wanted to share that part because without a monster and a transformation, I feel that fiction can't succeed. And all of us have a monster that transforms our protagonist in some way. So that was my thought.
Yeah, the monster is gleeful.
Well,
we see a lot of Pammy restrained and Pammy twisting the truth, and then in the end we see kind of what lurks inside, which is
right. So that's the monster. It's mental illness, and it's caused by usually abuse, sexual abuse as children. The personality splits off because it's intolerable.
finds a different reality to be safe in.
That's right.
That's why we need to create safe realities for people. So thank you, Rosalind.
Yeah.
Let's see, I guess I'll round this out and I'll be quick because I see we're coming up on the hour. So my story, Call Us Home, in this anthology tracks 5 different Angelinos as their world begin. Oh, let me put me on spotlight. Here we go. Tracks 5 different Angelinos as their worlds are ruptured. And what it looks like is different for each of them. For Luis, who is someone who always flew under the radar, all of a sudden he is noticed, and he's noticed in a bad way. Wherever he goes, people accuse him of being a criminal. And in some ways, he becomes his worst fear. And that kind of theme repeats for each of the 5 characters. There's I'm going to read from the story, and I'll tell you the story of Cassie. So Cassie's a homebound bookworm magic aficionado. She's the person that people go to for answers. She doesn't like to leave the house, and you'll see why. But as this story unfolds, she's stuck at home and is sort of going through a lot, and she's reaching out to her friend Jen. She tried to reach Jen again. The call didn't connect. She tried texting. Why won't you fucking answer? The text could not be delivered. Normally, when something crazy like this happened, Cassie would pull out her yarn and knit something, usually a small geometric shape, a square or a spiral. On good days, her concentration was total and time slipped by without her noticing. When she reached the end, a message would become clear. Someone in trouble, a spirit seeking to make contact, an upcoming resonance that would weaken the barriers between worlds, useful information that she would pass along through the network so others could take action. She was a seer, not a vanquisher. She knew her place in the grand scheme. It was a good day if she never had to leave the house. Other people carried too much sorrow, hatred, and desire, shedding it freely to soak into her skin. When she got too close, she became the lone tree on the floodplain, battered and soaked, chilled, praying for the rain to stop. Poor Cassie, so sorry for herself, can't even bother not to die, is a message on her phone. She threw her phone against the wall, then went and checked the damage. A broken screen, no more cell signal. Good. The outside world held nothing for her. If she was trapped, that meant more time to investigate. She had a theory already. Something had upset the balance among the 5 houses of magic. And it kind of goes on with a couple different sections of the story. We meet Salt, and we also meet Darnell, who is a Black actor / waiter who works at a bistro in Culver City. And likewise, his whole mantra is like bringing joy to the world and like being a positive impact on people, a very like kind of la vibe. But he is possessed by this darkness that's infesting Los Angeles and ends up attacking a woman on a bus, becoming the thing that he always feared people would see him as. So in my story, there's kind of a lot of the monstrous transformation is always the character being forced to become the thing that they don't want to become, but that society expects them to be. So I'll leave it at that to just say that it's so funny how a lot of these stories hit differently now, but like it's still relevant, but what I pick up on and what I focus on as a reader, some of these things just like scream out like, wow, like with more power now. So thank you everyone for being here. I don't know if anyone wants to say some final words. I will take myself off the spotlight and put us all on gallery.
I actually noticed something about your story. You use very classic horror story tropes in this story in a very urban setting, and you just make it very dark because California is kind of, especially Los Angeles, it can be a very flowery place. So, I mean, was that, you have like classic horror tropes and you just kind of mesh them all together. And you do it so beautifully and so seamlessly. Yeah, I just wanted to say that.
The tropes are there to be used and to be mashed and to be, put through the meat grinder and to come out something new and different, because every story is new and different in some way. So thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think about it like that sometimes. It's like, well, what's the thing I want to say? But then what's like the thing that's true?
I just want to say something if I can, Cody, and that is if anybody who's listening is a writer and wants to submit, once your window is open, Cody and his team take really good care of the writers, and it's been such a lovely experience. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, and thanks for being part of the community that we create every time we get together, which is always fun. So I believe our next event is February 10th. We're on a roll with the 10th of the month, having a reading like this, which I think is fun. Not sure if we have a theme yet, but we'll be announcing more information. We'll be putting more information out there about Book Monster. We wish them all well and safety and health right now. And so with that, I guess, thank you for your time. Enjoy the short rest of your weekend. Good luck to everyone with this next week as it unfolds. I'll be thinking of you and wishing you strength.
And we'll all be working on stories for the next anthology based on this week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cody. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Cody.